Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on child-centered authentic education for the gifted. My name is Sandy Wallum, and I'm head of school at Seabury School, an independent school for gifted students in pre-K through grade 8 in Tacoma, Washington. I'm also the facilitator for the Child-Centered Gifted Education Consortium, a group of educational leaders from around the world who are committed to a child-centered approach to gifted education. Before we launch into our discussion, we thought a bit of background on our group might be helpful. Our group came together in March of 2020, the early days of the pandemic. We were all registered to attend a conference on child-centered gifted education that was to have taken place in April in Denver, Colorado. The conference had been developed by Dr. Linda Silverman and was to be hosted by the Gifted Development Center. It was intended to foster conversation about child-centered gifted education among leaders from around the world. When the conference had to be canceled due to COVID, Dr. Silverman created an email group that allowed participants to connect with each other for support, ideas, and words of encouragement. It became a lifeline for many of us during those tumultuous days. In these early days of the pandemic, as schools were closing and suddenly faced with having to reinvent how we served our students, emails went back and forth between group members, asking for advice, sharing ideas, and encouraging each other. A weekly Zoom meeting was set up for group members to meet informally for collaboration and support. Dr. Silverman has consistently provided inspiration and advice to the group, and we are so grateful to have had the chance to work with her all of these months. In those early days, we understood that the combination of the asynchronous development we see in our gifted students and their overexcitabilities were likely to make them uniquely vulnerable to the changes and the challenges the pandemic was bringing to schooling and to life in general. By wrestling with difficult questions, sharing ideas and strategies, and problem solving together, we began to find ways to work through the challenges we faced. In summer of 2020, the group collaborated on an article for parents on how to support their child during distance learning. It was published by the Gifted Development Center and NAGC. As the 2021 school year went on, the group's conversations moved to the more general topic of child-centered gifted education and how we understood what that meant for us as educators, for our students, and for our programs. Eventually, we decided to take on the task of creating a document that would more clearly define what we believe to be the essential elements of child-centered gifted education and the priorities it demanded of educators and programs. The resulting document, recently published by the Gifted Development Center, is the backbone of the newly organized Child-Centered Gifted Education Consortium and the network we are continuing to build. That work is what brings us here today. Our panel today includes Dr. Linda Silverman, Director of the Gifted Development Center in Denver, Colorado, along with representatives from the consortium. As we begin, Dr. Silverman will provide some background into the connections between our work and Dabrowski, and particularly his thoughts on the importance of authentic education. Dr. Silverman, welcome.
Hi, Sandy. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and to be a part of this wonderful panel. I'd like to talk to you today about a wonderful chapter that was done by Marlene Rankel in the book Dabrowski's Theory of Positive Disintegration by Sal Mondaglio. It's the 4th chapter, and it's on Dabrowski on authentic education. Considered by Dabrowski one of the most knowledgeable people about his theory, Marlene worked closely with Dr. Dabrowski for the last 12 years of his life. She collaborated with him on the development of an unpublished manuscript, Authentic Education. And thanks to Sal, this wonderful manuscript made its public debut in 2008. Dabrowski stated that authentic education is humanistic, true humane education. It enhances the development of the child in becoming a fully aware human being, embracing higher human values. It respects individual children as unique and unrepeatable, and it awakens children to the knowledge that others are unique and unrepeatable. It supports the inner psychic milieu and the child's developmental potential toward multi-level development. It appreciates overexcitabilities, which are often perceived as distracting or disturbing. But Dabrowski emphasized that children with overexcitabilities are sensitive, empathic, gifted, and creative. Dabrowski felt that public education could be used to facilitate mental health in society. Such an education strives for the harmony that respects, not rejects, differences. And it is this harmony of true education with higher human values that differentiates the education of human beings from the training of animals. He believed that much of what passes for education, particularly in America, employs a system of rewards and punishments borrowed from the psychological conditioning of animals. Marlene writes, training treats children as herd animals. Authentic education treats them as individual human beings. Authentic education encourages children to develop their own hierarchy of values and aims, and it supports the realization of those values and aims. Dabrowski maintained that teachers must provide individualized education programs for children with accelerated developmental potential. The chapter ends with the following quote: educational systems that focus on intelligence and academic achievement are still training rather than educating our children. In 1991, a group of gifted program developers, psychologists, authors, advocates, and graduate students attended a workshop on Dabrowski's theory at Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio. After the workshop, we gathered in Columbus, Ohio, for the purpose of redefining giftedness as a child-centered concept rather than as achievement-oriented. We called ourselves the Columbus Group, and we were profoundly influenced by Dabrowski's theory. The Columbus Group defined giftedness as asynchronous development, in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. The Columbus Group definition is phenomenological, involving qualitative differences, intensity, complexity, and enhanced awareness. It has a distinctly Dabrowskian flavor. Heightened intensity refers to overexcitabilities, qualitative differences in inner experience, and awareness that comes directly out of TPD. And Michael Piofsky wrote, this intensity must be understood as a qualitatively distinct characteristic. It is not a matter of degree, but a different quality of experiencing, vivid, absorbing, penetrating, encompassing, complex, commanding, a way of being quiveringly alive. While it is still unpopular in our achievement-focused academic circles, child-centeredness is not a new concept in gifted education. In fact, Lita Hollingworth created the first course in gifted education and the first textbook in the field based on this principle. A psychologist, Lita asserted that education must adapt to the child, not the other way around. Carl Rogers was one of her students, and his client-centered therapy appears to have been modeled after Lita's child-centered therapy. In 1922, 100 years ago, Lita incorporated emotional education into her experimental classes for the gifted in New York City. Her observations regarding the psychological ramifications of uneven development of the gifted were among the foundations of the definition of giftedness as asynchronous development. The Child-Centered Gifted Education Consortium has redefined gifted education in concert with its roots. It values the inner world of the child, who the child is, instead of the child's achievement or potential for recognized achievement, what the child does. This fragile perspective, related to Dabrowski's principles of authentic education, is creating a renaissance in the field of gifted education, placing the child in the center of the educational process, rather than the measurement of the child's achievement, which Dabrowski considered unilevel. We hope to inspire child-centered gifted education programs throughout the world. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman. We're going to move into our panel discussion at this point. And so I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and just tell you a little bit about what they do. We'll start with Anne.
Hi, I'm Anne Beneventi, and I have founded 3 schools for the gifted. I'm also the director of Gifted Qualitative Assessment, a relational method for identifying giftedness in children, adolescents, adults, that originated with Anna Marie Roper.
Thank you. How about Ellen?
Hi, I'm Dr. Ellen Honeck, and I am the new assistant head of school at Tesselation School as of earlier this year. And before that, I have been director of curriculum and instruction at the Knox School of Santa Barbara, a pre-K through 8th grade school, as well as the manager of gifted and talented programs in Denver Public Schools, a district of 92,000 students.
Thanks, Ellen. Barbara.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you are partaking of our sharing today, wherever you are in the universe. I have had the joy and honor of being head of school and interim head of school at 3 schools, one in Boulder, Colorado, which I founded, Rocky Mountain School for the Gifted and Creative, a stint as an interim head at Helios, and then I've just finished up 9 years and have now retired as head of school at Nova Middle School in Olympia, Washington. And I also do consulting with parents and families and with schools, and I'm thrilled to be here with this group of really far-thinking and passionate people.
Thank you. Nikki.
So my name is Nikki Myers, and I'm in Colorado Springs, and I am the founding director and principal of Academy for Advanced and Creative Learning, and we are a charter public school in Colorado Springs District 11, and we have a kindergarten through 8th grade program.
Thanks, Nikki. Rosemary. You unmute.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rosemary Cathcart. I'm all the way from New Zealand and delighted to have been able to join you. Thank heavens for Zoom. I've been involved in this field in a whole range of ways for about 40 odd years now. Some years ago, I founded our first gifted education centre in New Zealand, the Gifted Education Centre. And in the mid-90s, we founded a program called the One Day School, which eventually became spread nationwide. We had, in the end, about 600 kids coming through that program. And then just about 18 years ago, I pulled out of that and decided to concentrate on the professional learning aspect, because I thought that was maybe where we could make the most difference. So we now have Reach Education, which focuses specifically on that, and that is a child-centered program as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Teresa.
There. My name is Teresa Brown, and I'm Dean of Student Support at Academy for Advanced and Creative Learning here in Colorado Springs. I have the honor of getting to work with Nikki Myers and our 300 some odd kids and all of their families, and it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, now that you've met our panel, let's get into our discussion of of the work that we've been doing, and particularly about our passion for child-centered education for gifted students. So we're going to start just by asking each of our panelists to share a little bit about what drew them to a child-centered approach to gifted education. Why is that perspective so important to each of us? So again, we'll start with Dr. Silverman.
I've always had a child-centered approach. It's probably because I'm in some kind of contact with Lita Hollingworth. I think of her as my mate. But every time I've worked in this field since I was 17 years old, everybody referred to me by my first name. They still do at Gifted Development Center. So you can stop calling me Dr. Silverman. And I believe in listening to children. I believe in listening to parents. I believe that the child is what we're all about. So for us not to be child-centered makes no sense to me. That feels foreign. And it always has. It's just been a part of my philosophy since I was 17 years old and got started in this field.
Thank you. How about Anne?
Well, I have encountered so many children who were languishing in school. I see incredible thinkers, children with early math talent or passion, who are forced to stay on grade level, and children with strong leadership potential and creativity with no opportunities to develop that skill. And I see children who lose hope and a sense of belonging at a very young age. And it's really a tremendous loss of potential for them and for the world. I know giftedness doesn't need to be a deficiency with isolation and loneliness. My life's mission has been to offer gifted children an appropriate environment where they have the right to develop who they seek to be, where they can tell us what they need and we can give it to them.
Thank you so much. Ellen.
So I went into education focusing on how to make it better, as I believe a lot of educators do. And one of those things was that really focusing on that mind, heart, body connection and that true focus of the whole child and focusing on what the child can bring. So being influenced by Dabrowski's work, being influenced by the Reggio Emilia philosophy, where you're really looking at children are bringing in a lot of knowledge into the situation and into education. And it's our job as educators to stop and listen to what they're saying, as opposed to saying, we're coming in and we're going to fill you like an empty vessel. And so instead thinking, what is it that they're bringing to the table and how is it that I can foster their knowledge and continue to grow their knowledge and their interest and their passion, again, through that mind, heart, body connection, child-centeredness.
Thank you so much. Barb.
Well, unlike the other people on this panel, I came in as an uneducated parent into this field who had a child who needed something much, much different than the public school was going to offer for her. And consequently, because of many people who supported that point of view, founded a school. And I learned, and it was true to my authentic self, about being student-centered. There was no discussion. It was not an intellectual adventure for me. It was just made sense. That's what my child needed. And over the years, I've begun to look at child-centered education as the epitome of differentiation. And that is the way that we serve the students, the parents, the educators. It's about differentiation. You hear that term all the time. And I think child-centered education, focusing on the student and what their needs are, not just academically, but in their spiritual development, their moral development, and their intellectual development in all the various ways that that appears, and in leadership development. So this is great meaning to me, not as much from an intellectual point of view, but from the perspective of first a parent and then an advocate for the kids within even the schools that I've founded or led. And so this is something that I feel really passionate about, and I see the benefit of it with kids, particularly who have uneven development or things that they really are passionate about, and other things they don't really care very much about, and they'll eventually hire somebody else to do those things. So thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Nikki.
So I always wanted to teach. I was that kid who played school all of the time, but I had no background or even had heard of the word gifted education all until I got to college. And I didn't have any coursework in it at the time, but I had a professor named Dr. Sharon Eimers who had a passion because of her own family. And so she infused some courses with it that I had. And one of them was bringing her little grandson in. And she was so proud of him, but she was pointing out to us, look what he's doing. Pay attention. This is what he is doing. This is the thinking that is happening. And so I had that frame of reference when I started to do some studying on my own, got into the classroom, had no support for gifted ed, but I knew I wanted to go into it in some way. I felt drawn to it. And then I had kids and I married into this gifted family. And then I began recognizing these things in my own family. I had a little brother who taught himself to read and just began reading about these intensities started fitting and the overexcitability. So I'm like, oh, that's this person in my life. And this person, oh, wow, that's me. And so paying attention to those personal stories and having my kids who are now late teens, watching them go through these things. So I was 13, it's actually 15 years ago, trying to find a placement for my own child after school shut down. And a group of parents and educators said, we need this. And it was that 2008 recession. And we needed something here in Colorado Springs that was listening to the stories of kids and paying attention to them. And so out of that, a group of us founded this school, not having that on our list of things for life to do, but it needed to happen because of the needs of the kids. And some of them were twice exceptional. Some of them were just quirky gifted. Some of them were just their own unique selves. All of them were their own unique selves. And we needed this to happen because of individual schools and the displacement that was occurring for many of them. And so that piece that I strongly believe I talked to our staff about now going into our 13th year is that kids don't wait for real life. Their experiences right now as children are real life. We're not preparing them for real life. They're living right now and their reality is right now and they need support right now. They don't wait to live until later when we have filled them up. And so I want to be a part of those experiences being good for them so that they have healthiness right now in their lives and grow into healthy people in their futures as well.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Rosemary.
Yeah, I'm rather like Linda in that I was pretty young too when I started in my early teens, when I started thinking about teaching and what it was meant to do. I was a little bit fortunate in that New Zealand for a long time has in theory at least, had a child-centered foundation for its education. Goes right back to a prime minister of ours called Fraser, who in 1939 was very close with the head of education, and they came up with a definition for education that said that every child in every school, whatever part of the country, whatever their family background, was entitled to an education that met their individual personal needs. And that made a heap of sense to me. And when I went into teaching, I took that for granted as the foundation of what I was doing. And in fact, I think I was telling the group the other day that when the first textbook I was given to teach from didn't do that, so I threw it out the window. Sort of slightly to the horror of my head of department, but it did free me up to find a proper way to teach. but I didn't hear anything about gifted children. It hadn't occurred to me. I knew nothing about it until one sort of popped out as a son of mine a few years later, and I had to try and figure out what on earth to do with this child. He also happened to be one of the twice exceptional lot, and it took a lot of time and a lot of pain to figure out what was going on. And as a parent, and then I got involved with our National Gifted Association, and as its national president, I was hearing from parents and families all around the country, and they were all experiencing the same thing. There was a huge gap between what schools were doing and actually meeting their children's needs. And I went on from there, as I said before, to set up a gifted centre to try and make gifted education visible in my country. And working with the one-day school program, where we used a qualitative assessment approach, it was so helpful to be able to see where the gaps were between what ordinary school thought it should supply and what perhaps we were beginning to see, and the strategies and the techniques that we were developing to meet the needs of those children. And along the way, I met this person called Linda Silverman, who started to introduce me to other really interesting people, like the work of Anne-Marie Roper, and then a little bit later, meeting other people like Michael Pahowski, who was very helpful to me when I was doing my doctorate. And you tie all those things together and you look at all the individual children you see along the way, and look at the gaps between what schools supplies and what that child needs if you have a child-centered education approach. It just made sense, and it works. And I find now that I'm working largely with teachers, that once you start to put that in front of them, it begins to make sense to them too. And they say, this has changed how I teach. And I think if we can do that through the consortium, through the work that we do, if we can encourage people to look at the gap between the child as that human being, that complex, interesting, sensitive human being, and what we do as teachers, then I think we have a very strong foundation for our teaching approach. So it's a pleasure to meet with all of you here who are listening to this program, and who all of us who are working together in this consortium too. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Teresa.
Thank you. So when I began teaching, the expectation was that all teachers were doing the same thing at the same time in their classrooms. So you could stand in the middle of the hallway and hear the same lesson happening. And I had a student that I'd allowed to walk in the back of the classroom while I taught, because he had demonstrated that he could listen and walk at the same time, and it helped him think. And I ended up getting a little talking to about it, because he wasn't seated like everyone else. He wasn't doing what everyone else was doing. But yet, if you asked him any question about the lesson or about that topic, he could rattle off all the information and then some. And so I thought to myself, why is this such a big deal? It hurts my heart to know that he's going to have to be contained just to please an adult. And so as I grew in my practice, I realized that everything in a classroom, from where we keep the crayons to the books that are there, to where, the things that we're teaching and how we're doing it, every learning opportunity should be meeting the kids' needs, whether it's an area of interest for them or simply something like the pencils. Where are they? And it should be about meeting their needs, not ours. So it's not about the ease of grading or evaluation or making sure everyone is doing exactly the same work, because then it's fair. It's about, what's the child learning? Are they learning to think and explore ideas, or are they learning to comply and simply produce work? Gifted kids need more flexibility, more differentiation, and they need it to look different than a typical student does. I loved seeing the growth in my students, both in their knowledge about what we were learning, but also in their sense of self when the work they were doing was meaningful to them. And ultimately, that's why this is most important. I want teachers to be able to understand that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Like I think everyone else on this panel, this work is a labor of love. It's a passion for me, like I think you can see is the case for all of us. For me, it started with my own experience in school, being told as a 5th grader that I had qualified for a gifted program, but there was no gifted program. So I got to do an extra math book nobody else had to do, and had to write 2 research reports that nobody else had to write with no help or support. It was not fun. And then I got into middle school and got into an actual program and found out what it was like to be in a classroom where the conversations were stimulating and exciting, and where I was challenged to do things that I didn't know I could do. I was an oldest child and a teacher pleaser. So, you know, I was happy if I was making the teacher happy, but suddenly I found that I had a lot more that I could offer than I ever realized. So I went into school interested in gifted education, and then being told there were no classes, there was no training. And so I, like many of us here, started out just reading everything I could get my hands on. A lot of Linda's work I've found in my file cabinet over the years. And eventually became a teacher in a public school gifted program before coming to the school that I'm at now. And one of the things I think I've always done as a teacher is tried to make my program fit my kids, whether I was working with kids on, you know, sort of with more learning challenges, or, you know, more typically developing kids or gifted kids. But when I got into the gifted program, I really found the need for that, and why that was so important, and came to realize that giftedness for I think all of us on this panel is really a person thing, not just a school thing. It's a way kids learn and grow. It's not just about what you achieve or what kind of grades you get. And that's been my driving kind of force all along. And being at the school that I'm at now, where I've had a chance to develop a program really designed from the ground up based on what we know about how these kids learn and grow, it's been so powerful to see what we've been able to do for kids. So I'm just thrilled to be here and part of this group, and anxious for you to get to hear more from us. So let's move on to our next question. There's a number of definitions of giftedness out there. Some of them are more achievement oriented, and some of them are more child-centered. When our group went to put together a document to describe what child-centered gifted education looked like from our perspective, we found 4 definitions of giftedness that really seem to fit for us. And so we're going to take a couple of minutes here to just take a look at those definitions. And so Linda, first, you're going to talk about a couple of the definitions that really mean something to you. Let me get those up here for you. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's try this again. Okay, there we go. No, that's not it. Goodness sakes. There we go. Sorry about that.
So the earliest definition of giftedness on the screen was from Anna Marie Roper. Giftedness is a greater awareness, a greater sensitivity, and a greater ability to understand and to transform perception into intellectual and emotional experiences. And this has been considered the most important definition of emotional giftedness, as well as a general definition of giftedness. A second one, 10 years later, is from Michael Piahowski, who's certainly well known in this context of Dabrowski Congress. Giftedness is not a matter of degree, but a different quality of experiencing. vivid, absorbing, penetrating, encompassing, complex, commanding, a way of being quiveringly alive. And I mentioned this earlier in relation to the overexcitabilities. But what I find most interesting is that everyone, including Rosemary Cathcart, everyone's definition that we're describing today were or are members of the Columbus Group. So definitionally, the Columbus Group has offered all of these definitions. And the main one I gave the first sentence of in the opening remarks, but the full, the full definition is giftedness is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive ability, heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. This asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them particularly vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. So what the definition says is that the higher the IQ, the greater the asynchrony. And it's also true that the greater the discrepancies between strengths and weaknesses, as in twice exceptional children, the greater the asynchrony. And it also talks about their vulnerability. And vulnerability is a very important concept in Dabrowski's theory. But another piece of definition is that it honors the role that parents and teachers and counselors have in developing giftedness optimally. And many of the definitions do not include those elements. The last one is offered, and it's the newest one, by Rosemary Cathcart, and I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
Can you get it up for me, Sandy, so that people can look at? Thank you. Right. There are a couple of things I would like to say about this definition. There's a reference, first of all, to the Maori people of Aotearoa, and that's critical. It's something that I learned about in working with Maori, which is that they have a very different perception of what makes of giftedness, of what it is. And it takes me right back to something that I think I first wrote in about 1992, which is that when you have cultural difference, it's an important thing to remember that every bridge is meant to be crossed in two directions, not in one. So it's not just about looking at the minority culture and thinking that you want to bring them towards what your culture is so that they achieve in your culture. It's about being open to the possibility that you can learn from that culture yourself. And when I looked at how Maori responded to giftedness, I thought there is such a rich thing there to learn, because what they say is when you are looking at a person, you look first at their qualities as a person, and only then do you consider their particular abilities and exceptionalities. And that makes such sense when you think about it, because it is the qualities that a person has which determine how they use the abilities they have. Hitler, for example, if you looked at him closely, you might say that in some senses he was a very gifted leader. but he used his abilities for evil purposes, for self-centered purposes, for the search for power for himself. Whereas when we look at some other individuals that we know about, Greta Thunberg, for example, there is somebody who uses her abilities for other people beyond herself, for her community, for her society, for the world that she lives in. And Maori say this is how we must regard this business of abilities. Look at the qualities of the person, and they see giftedness in the light of the service that it makes to the community. That to me makes an awful lot of sense. And at the same time, I think this ties very, very closely to Dabrowski's work. It certainly does for me, because what comes out of it, if we look at it, there is Dabrowski's emphasis on moral growth and development, on the empathy that more highly morally developed people demonstrate for the other people, the other things that are in their world and in their lives. And this is so much what we see in so many of our gifted children, this early impulse towards an ethical concern for others, for people, for animals, for the community. If I can give you just two examples very quickly. One is a little child of 3 years and 2 days who attended an event at his sister's school, which is held annually. It's called the Anzac Parade, and it's a parade that every year celebrates the courage of the soldiers who left New Zealand and Australia to fight in World War I and World War II. And so it is saying what brave people they were. And he had never been to such a ceremony before. Well, he hardly would have, since he was only 3 years and 2 days. But what happened to him was that he came back distressed and saying, why is it necessary for people to have a war? Why do people feel they need to go and kill people? So at 3, he was able to conceptualize, to get an idea of what war is and how destructive it is, and to question the purposefulness of that, which is quite a remarkably sophisticated understanding for a child of that age. The other example I would quote very briefly, when I was doing my doctorate, part of it was looking at senior high school students, some of whom were gifted and some were not. Relatively small sample, but one thing that stuck out very clearly was that the senior high school students who fell into the gifted bracket were all, without exception, quite intensively involved in different ways in helping other people. Everything from setting up a cafe in the town to help students who didn't have anywhere to go, who were likely to get into trouble, to individual help for different families and communities. Whereas the students, their classmates who were not gifted were, I think it was something like the gifted ones are 3 to 4 times more likely to be involved in socially helpful activities. And it just struck me very much that if we're going to look at giftedness, we have to think about the whole person. What's in them when they're just little, that infant, and how they are growing right through, and what kind of an adult they will become. And so to me, part of thinking about this is to think about the life vision that so many of our gifted youngsters begin to form. And I think that ties in so closely to everything that Dabrowski has said, and hence this definition, which I'm in the process of putting forward for use here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's move on as we think a little bit more about this whole idea of what it means to be gifted, and we think about what that means for kids from a child-centered perspective. The question is, why is a child-centered perspective particularly important for gifted children? It can be said that focusing on the needs of the whole child is helpful for all children. What is it about gifted education that makes a child-centered focus particularly important? And we're going to start with Anne on this one. Oh, you're muted, Anne.
The definitions that we adopt are change the focus from an external orientation of achievement or talent development to an internal difference between the gifted and others. Gifted are a very diverse group, but they also have some commonalities, and they feel different because they are different, and they often internalize that something's wrong with them because they don't fit the system. Of course, we would like to have child-centered education for everyone, but the gifted, when you look at the characteristics, you can understand why they really need a different approach. They don't fit a standardized curriculum because they're out of the box thinkers and their development is uneven. And so to put them on grade level and they just don't fit. Their thinking is more complex and they learn more rapidly with less repetition. In order to engage, they need more meaning and challenge in the curriculum. But I agree with what others are saying about their strong sense of ethical issues and how they have a more passionate sense of justice. These are traits that we really need in the world. And these children need opportunities to develop these strengths, these strengths that can't really be measured with a standardized approach. When we're educating for conformity only to determine giftedness, we lose this diverse richness and uniqueness that the individual has to offer. So now we want to raise kids that stand up on the playground when a child is being bullied. And when we educate for a connection economy, for people who are able to weave community around them, then and selflessly lead, which we see in many of our gifted kids. Well, these people are happier, more resilient, and come out ahead. If you aren't defining ahead as beating everybody else, I think that effective schools have discovered the way to be effective is to not treat people as average, but to embrace the fact that nobody's average. I'm hearing that employers are hiring those who don't look or act or believe all of the things that everyone else does, the creative thinkers, the problem solvers. And so rather than insisting that everybody fits in, the gifted are allowed to be who they are in all their diversity.
Thank you so much, Anne. Ellen, how about you?
So when I think of child-centered perspective and the importance in gifted education, I go back to a passion area again in early childhood and thinking about everyone's coming in with a strength, with a knowledge, and the asynchrony, which was highlighted in all of the definitions, and really understanding that there is that vast difference of developmental age, with their affective age, with their cognitive age, and what that looks like, especially at the younger levels. And then again, that continues on throughout. But in school and child-centered school, we're not educating the life out of them. A child-centered school is embracing their strengths, embracing their culture, their equity, who they are, and really letting them drive the education and the learning, so that instead of educating the creativity out, educating the excitement out, we're truly building those lifelong learners, because there is that desire and there is that focus on who I am as a person, who the child is as a person, and what their interests are, and how to foster that growth and that development throughout time. And then in terms of small private schools versus large public schools, again, there's a really wide range of what we can focus on in terms of flexibility, in terms of looking at systems. Oftentimes in smaller schools, you're more able to focus on the child because you have more flexibility and you're not dictated by a larger system. And regardless of where you're at in the larger schools, it's important to remember that you still have a sphere of influence. So whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a district level personnel, there's still that sphere of influence that you can go back and really look at and focus on the child, focus on that individual and say, how can I make things work for this child? How can I focus on letting the child tell me what they're interested in, and that true, authentic listening, and listening to what the child is saying, listening to what they're bringing to the environment, and moving forward that way.
Thank you so much. Nikki.
So all of us as human beings want to be seen. And we all can probably point to that teacher who saw us, and we had that connection and that relationship. And the more entrenched we are as educators in seeing kids as a grade level and as a cohesive group, instead of seeing them as individuals, the more we're going to miss these kids who have unusual needs that we have to be able to recognize. And that's one of the things I talk about a lot when I train pre-service teachers and our staff here, is we need to be able to see kids. And when you see them, you recognize they are an individual. And the vulnerability, we've all, you've heard this group touch here on the amazing capacity that these kids have for empathy and viewing world problems and viewing local problems. But that's when there's healthiness. And that's when they are able to reach out beyond themselves. When they are in pain, like any human being, when they don't have what they need, when their needs are not being met, they can hurt others too, and they hurt themselves. And our suicide rates are horrific across our country and locally. And these kids have a very distinct vulnerability. And the more rare they are from their peers, the more intense their needs are, the more that we see these intensities come out. When you have watched a 5-year-old wrestle with existential angst, and when you have watched that 3-year-old sob over, our version here was when the tsunami in Japan hit, and we had kids who could conceptualize how many people were dying in kindergarten. We had to make sure, and parents had to shut the news off. There is a vulnerability that is there. And if you just see them as, well, 3-year-olds aren't going to pay attention to that because you're stuck in a model that looks at a grade level as a cohesive developmental group, instead of seeing these needs, you're not addressing that vulnerability. You're not giving them a chance to be altruistic and supportive. And you're not recognizing that incredible shutdown and damage that can happen to the individual as well as everyone around them when those needs aren't met. And sometimes that damage hides and comes out later in adulthood. Sometimes it occurs along the way of their journey in K-12 education. And, one of the kids I think of who wrestled with existentialism as an 8th grader, he's just irritated that his friends wouldn't shut up in line so they could all get inside, and he's in my office for 20 minutes wrestling with existential behavior of others and groupthink. And I was like, dude, you're going to high school next year. We got to figure this out for you. But I agree with your sense of justice. I see you and I want to support you. And so that small scale to the big scale, we've got to be able to meet kids' needs. And we have too many mental health issues going on for us to ignore these needs and risk that vulnerability and the wounds that can happen when we don't.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think of a student that came to my school one time because she had come home from her public school classroom and told her mom, I finally realized, she was a second grader. I finally realized what I need to do to get the teacher to like me. I need to stop being me, and I need to be the person that my teacher wants me to be. And that's when she ended up at my school, where we let her be her. So thank you. We know that gifted program services, as they are offered in many schools and school districts, not just public schools, but all around, have not always done a great job of identifying kids from across the spectrum, whether it be kids with learning differences or kids from underserved communities of various kinds, BIPOC kids or kids in socioeconomically challenging environments. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how a child-centered focus in identifying gifted kids can help us find more of those underrepresented kids. How have members of the panel found a child-centered approach to be helpful in finding kids that might not otherwise be recognized and served? And just to be clear, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So those kids that oftentimes get missed, but there's lots of kids that get missed for lots of reasons. Let's start with Barb. What can you share with us about a child-centered approach and identification, and how that helps us find kids we might not otherwise find?
First of all, the schools that I've been associated with have used a more eclectic and broader view of identification. So it isn't just a single test score that either qualifies or disqualifies a student. We understand giftedness to be much more complex and layered than that. Assessment that I'm familiar with and was trained in Holland to administer is called the World Game. It's a nonverbal intelligence test, and it's used in play therapy. It's also used to recognize and differentiate different cognitive styles, and to find visual spatial learners, and to assess folks who might have dyslexia. And I was particularly interested in getting training for this because, in my experience, there are a lot of kids who don't test well. And there are a lot of kids who have different academic strengths or weaknesses. And in the case of some kids, because they may have a disability or a learning weakness, if they have a strong score in some other element of a test, it eliminates them from the kind of support they need. So the World Game was very attractive to me. And when I came back to Nova after having this training, it wasn't 2 months after that a family just showed up at Nova because they saw the sign on the side of the road, and this 6th grade girl, who happens to be African American, had insisted that her mother find another school for her. She was miserable. She was terrible at math. And that was the only thing the school would focus on, was getting her to be a better mathematician. And they didn't care about any of the rest of her development. And so I met with the mom and with our student, and it was a terrific experience because in her conversation, she showed such complexity and depth. And when she did her actual assessment, of course, she tanked and got about the worst score. She might as well have answered 2 questions and not done anything else. She was really terrible at math. And she had such complexity and such great passion. And so consequently, I suggested that that she do the world game. And in the world game, you provide the kids or whoever the adult, whoever's taking it, with a certain number of blocks. And they're different shapes and forms and colors, and they represent the kind of things that you would find in a village. And their assignment is to build a community, to build a village. That is their only direction. And your job as the assessment person is to be quiet, observe them, and give them 20 minutes to build something, and then you ask them about it. Well, this sixth grade girl was extraordinary. She provided the most complex description of the community that she built and how all the various parts of the community had to work together in order for them to all survive. And she had a hospital that she thought was really too large for the community, but she didn't have smaller blocks that she could use. And she talked about how the farmers were in a position where they were required, it was the sole source of food for their community, and how they all contributed to making that farmer successful. And as just her sense of equity, she talked about the figures being different colors representing different kinds of economic levels in the community, and it was just extraordinary. So we accepted her. I said, this person has to be here for us to be able to support her, and it really doesn't matter if she ever gets great at math or not. That's not her mission. Her mission is around social justice and about equity and building community and relationships. She came to Nova. She never did very well in math, and we all sort of gave up on it and said, what you need to do, what we need to help you read literature that challenges communities and thinking, and to give you the opportunity to step into our actual community here in Olympia and make differences. So she graduated. She's now a junior in high school, where she continues to not do very well in math, and nobody cares anymore because she is totally into building a strong community, both in the high school and in the larger community, working with kids who are underrepresented in many ways, and communities that need greater voice, and whether it's kids or the high school that she's at, and in community organizations. And she's just doing a fabulous job. And as soon as we took the emphasis off of her weakness and developed, did the differentiation that was appropriate for her development, it released this kid to be able, she'll be a mover and a shaker. And I can't wait to see what she does for all of us as she moves into adulthood. So that kind of an assessment, taking priority over these other assessment tools, is really important from my perspective. Thanks.
Great story, Barb. Thank you so much. And talk to us a little bit about qualitative assessment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, at my school, I use gifted qualitative assessment to determine giftedness. And what we're seeing is that the gifted have a lot of inconsistent patterns of achievement. And there can be real discrepancies, especially if there is a learning disability. So in gifted qualitative assessment, We're really trying to see who this child is, their strengths, and then shore up their weaknesses by helping to actualize those strengths. And the practitioner pulls back their agenda so the child can emerge and you can get a glimpse. And gifted qualitative assessment gives us a chance to see the individual. It leaves enough space for them actually to tell us who they are. In the process, we use forms from the Gifted Development Center. We use the top 25 characteristics of giftedness, and parents write examples for the characteristics. And so when I'm reading through these characteristics, I'm looking for evidence of giftedness even before I meet the child. Last evening, I was reading some forms for a first grade child, and I wanted to share what her mother wrote. She wrote this under reasons well. I think it's part of the moral sensitivity. Her mom says she looks for ways to solve global problems. Like when there was a shortage of supplies during the pandemic, she made paper books for kids to work on during lockdown so they wouldn't be bored. She insisted on figuring out how to make hand sanitizer to give out near grocery stores. She quickly thinks of applying what's around her to solve a problem. And under morally sensitive, the mother wrote, she wishes everyone in the world can drive an electric car charged by sunlight, so animals and the planet can stay alive longer. So you can't measure moral sensitivity. We know that there's a correlation with giftedness, and we know it's a hallmark of the gifted. But using the characteristics that really can't be measured as a way to recognize giftedness can show us the strengths of the individual, even if they're not performing on a standardized test.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Rosemary.
That was so interesting listening to that, because we also had to develop some sort of form of assessment when we set up one day school. And at the time, there wasn't anybody around to talk to or to ask, what on earth will we do? And we did try and develop a form of qualitative assessment there where we looked at a lot of different things. And we certainly looked at the things that the child chose to do creatively as opposed to the measurable things they were doing at school. And we also found it really helpful to get right away from the parent interview thing and to just interview the child, and to let the parents know that interviewing the child was quite an important part of finding out about that child and getting them to talk about what they thought. I think these children are often very, very aware of what they need from school. And I'm reminded of being called into a school because they were a bit worried about a little boy of 7 who wasn't progressing as well as they thought that he should, and seemed to be being a bit of a nuisance in class. So I interviewed this little boy first, and I asked him to explain to me, what he wanted from school and what was going on. And he sat back and said, well, in that lovely way these children have, what's wrong is my teacher, and she doesn't know how to teach me. She needs to do this, 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 and this to make lessons right for me. I said, thank you very much. And we chatted about that for a bit. Then I went along to see the school principal, and she said to me, she said, I think maybe we've got that child with the wrong teacher. I think he needs to be with a teacher who does this, 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 and this. Guess what? So she then moved that child to someone who had nothing to do with quantitative stuff at all. It was about that little person who was there, who had a very good idea of what ought to be happening when he was at school. So I found so many other examples like that. But I also wanted to mention that how we go about identification also helps us to identify the kids from cultural minorities. And that is certainly where I've found having my Maori colleagues and friends to work with has been really helpful, because we are taking a much wider frame of reference, and I think a deeper frame of reference in looking at those kids. We now have, I mean, we look at all these things. If we're going to identify a kid, I have been down to the gifted classroom in Invercargill for the last couple of years for their assessment day. And when they come in on that assessment day, they do a whole range of things. They do drama activities together, a real fun activity. They do some problem solving. They have an interview with me, a whole lot of different things that they actually do during the day. And I think that has been really useful. But we also, of course, try to get some information from the school. And we now have a checklist that goes to the school, and it gets the data that they're going to tell you, you know. But as well, we have put together, what has the teacher observed in this child? And we include a whole range of things to look for that have been suggested to us by our Maori part of the community, and we have woven those in together. So the teachers are making an assessment in which they take into account things like wairuatanga, which is the spiritual qualities, or manakitanga, which is caring for other people, and the community, or rangatiratanga, which is the child's leadership qualities, as well as those things that you see in any checklist. And I think it gives an extra depth to what they're doing, and brings out the value of having been prepared to listen to our cultural minorities, because it helps us to not only to identify them, but to enlarge our understanding of what all our gifted children potentially bring to school and to value each. So, you know, it's been interesting.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to add something about twice exceptional children. That's my bag. I have a PhD in learning disabilities and a gazillion years of experience working with the gifted. And they're just my special tribe. So what I find happening that eliminates consideration of twice exceptional children from school programs is an over-reliance on the full-scale IQ score. And I've tried in my work to eliminate the power of the full-scale IQ score in determining who gets in and who gets rejected from gifted programs. And our research, we've been lucky enough to have contracts with Pearson and with the National Association for Gifted Children. Pearson creates the Wechsler scales, and the National Association for Gifted Children has sponsored United States-wide studies that we conducted at many sites for the WISC-4 and the WISC-5. And what we found was that the verbal scores were much more powerful than the full-scale IQ score. The verbal scores were more powerful than any of the other scores. And even the refugee children that were children that we tested at our center, their highest scores were verbal. The other thing that is a problem in a lot of tests is the emphasis on skills, processing speed, and working memory. So we, for many years, have tried to look at ways of getting children identified for gifted programs that did not involve Working memory did not involve processing skills. The verbal expanded crystallized index on the Wechsler scales involves all 4 subtests for the verbal side. Information, comprehension are 2 supplementary tests, but we always give them in addition to similarities in vocabulary. That in all of the studies we've done, those 4 are the most powerful indicators of who will be successful in a gifted program. And we have quite a bit of data that we've collected on that, and that Pearson has collected on that now. The other thing I want to say about twice exceptional children is that you have to be aware of the qualitative differences and the characteristics of giftedness in order to see them. We had a child who was reading Dante's Inferno at the age of 5, who ended up being dyslexic. And what was a clue about how bright she really was, because she kept bombing all the tests, was that she read Dante's Inferno. What kid picks that up at 5 years old? You would have to be gifted to do that. There are qualitative clues that people overlook. I remember training somebody most of you know and love, who in her very first training, she gave a Wechsler scale, a WIPSI, and the child came out in the upper 120s. And I said, that can't be right. And she said, well, why not? That's what the score says. Take a look at the developmental questionnaire and you tell me why that can't be right. And she was still too green and couldn't figure it out. So then she gave an SBLM and the child had a 183. And that was much more appropriate indicator of this child's abilities, because all the developmental milestones were advanced. And so if you're looking at qualitative indicators, if you're looking at the child's problem-solving ability, if you're looking at, well, this is a child who says actually and precisely with every sentence that comes out of their mouth, you get to be able to spot a gifted child. You get to watch them at airports and at supermarkets, and you see the signs of giftedness if you know what to look for, which is what Anna Marie's qualitative method was all about. Knowing what giftedness looks like, feels like, tastes like, so that you can recognize it when you see it, and not being reliant on the numbers. Trusting your own intuition when the numbers disagree with your perception of what that child is really capable of.
That is so true. And I've seen that happen so many times in my experience as well. And the actually test is certainly one that we use at our school. If those little people come in and use the word actually in the first few sentences, you're pretty sure our program is going to be a good fit for them. I want to mention too that unfortunately, in a lot of gifted programs, particularly in public schools, but not only in public schools, they are still using full-scale IQ scores and quantitative assessments only, and saying that a student with a test score of 129 is not gifted and a test score of 130 is gifted, when we all know that that's just not real and not right. And I think part of it comes from what a lot of us have experienced, which is that training programs for teachers don't include training in gifted education and how to identify and serve these kids. And so people are making decisions without a lot of good information. And so that's one of the things that I think we all will continue to advocate for and fight for. And I think one of the purposes of this consortium is to understand that looking at these kids is looking beyond the numbers. And not that the numbers aren't helpful, because the numbers tell a story, but you have to look at them in the right way to see that story. So thank you all. We're going to move on to our next question. And it has to do more with, once we get kids into programs, we always want our kids to be successful in whatever programs or whatever ways we're serving them. But I think in a child-centered approach to teaching and learning and to serving our kids, our definition of success sometimes looks different than what maybe a more traditional definition of success might look like. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, for us, what does it mean when we're being successful, and what does it mean when our kids are being successful? What does success look like? So we're going to start with Ellen.
I'm going to interrupt you, Ellen, and just say that Dabrowski also had a different definition of success. And for him, success was multi-levelness, the ability to understand higher level values, to be empathic, and to live your life in service.
Thanks, Linda. For that, when you think of success, again, thinking about where the child's coming from, where the child's background is, what their culture is, looking at how they were raised and what their society and their culture values, and really understanding if it's a collective of society, is success generally is more about the collective, whereas in American society, generally in the mainstream white culture, generally the success is defined by individual success. And so really pushing beyond in order to be successful as a high school student, you must get into a 4-year college program. What is that success look like, and how can we support students in understanding, and how can we support families in understanding that success comes in all different ways? There are individual people that are amazing, successful child raisers. And so what does that look like? Just because they don't have an outside of the home job, does that mean that they're not successful? What happens if you have a student that goes into a trade school? Does that mean that they're not successful? Does that mean that they can't follow their passions? And really looking at and understanding that focus on it's beyond the academic. So I can have the most fulfilling life, recognizing that I am going to do a specific career because I need the money to do that. But then I can follow my passions because I've chosen a career where I'm not going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from a degree. And I have a 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever type of position. And then I can work for my money, and then I can go and play for my passion. And so recognizing that it's okay to be successful that way is really important in terms of looking beyond our mainstream society, American culture, individualistic approach to what success is. And it's time that we push back on schools to really focus on the child. And not every child needs to go to a 4-year college. Not every child needs to continue through their path in that traditional fill out the college application, do different things. And so it's really moving beyond that success can be what's success for the entire family, success for the entire collective and society in general.
Thank you so much. Teresa, what does success look like in your program?
So when I talk to teachers about helping kids be successful, our conversation's not always about compliance or homework or grades necessarily. Some kids are going to turn in quality, top-notch work, regardless of what it is, because that's who they are and that's what they do. My experience, though, has taught me that a successful child has a larger stake in their learning than just checking a box. They're able to self-advocate, they can ask clarifying questions, make connections between ideas, and ask what if to help come up with solutions when there's a problem that we need to solve. And a child-centered approach to learning understands that success isn't about the rote regurgitation of information. It's about how the learner uses what we've taught to do meaningful work. This spring, I had one of our graduates came back and said, "Miss Brown, I've got to talk to you," like very serious. And so we sat down and I said, "Well, what's going on?" And they said, "Well, I spent all school year talking to my counselor at high school and asking for help in this particular class. I asked for a tutor. I asked for online resources. I asked for all kinds of ways that maybe I could help myself understand this better because I was really struggling. And I felt like I got blown off. And so over the course of the school year, they worked really hard and they used all their resources that they could find. And they did manage to pass. But at the end of the year, they went in to talk to their counselor and said, look, I might be gifted, but that doesn't mean I don't need help. I might be gifted, but that doesn't mean I don't need support. When a gifted kid is asking you for help, it means that I'm out of ideas. And I put my trust in you as the adult to be able to help me or to work together to help me find a solution. And you didn't step up. You didn't do that. And they said that other gifted kids were going to be coming to this counselor saying, hey, look, I need support. I need help. And they expected that this counselor would now do better because they now knew better. But this kid came back to tell us that they learned how to be this kind of advocate by being here, by being with me and by being with us here. When I think about what success is and what it means for our kids, it's the kid who finds joy in a strange, unexpected topic and then goes off to learn more and can't stop talking about it for several years. And it's that one that suggests an alternative project to show what they've learned because what you planned doesn't quite fit their vision. It's the one that creates a YouTube channel to get classmates involved in sharing their own stories, their own books. And it's the one who gets up on a stage and realizes that the stage is where their heart is. And when you go to watch them, all you see is this incredible amount of determination and joy at just being present and being there. It's the kid who finds their voice and they can speak up on behalf of themselves and others when it matters. And it's the kid who's secure and confident in who they are as a human being and wants to focus their college level work so that other kids can find books in which they see themselves. And I think most of all, success is the child who, after a couple of weeks being in your classroom or your school, says that it feels like home. That's a successful program. So, thanks.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Nikki, you're going to talk to us a little bit about what is not child-centered gifted education.
So this group has been fantastic at conversations as we have worked through the pandemic and tried to come up with, okay, why are we having these conversations and what are we seeing in our communities? And so part of defining something we feel like is also that opposite, that antonym. And what are we not talking about? Because some of this work feels big and weighty, especially when you're in a public school system that's constrictive or there's monetary restraints and it feels like we don't have time to do this work. And so part of what we're not talking about is a list. I just started listing it from these conversations we're having. So part of this is not viewing a child as a test score, not looking at that kid as they help my school's test score. So I'm going to keep them here and I'm going to refuse to refer them to an appropriate placement or another school or another teacher to support their giftedness because our school needs their score, or I need their score in my classroom. I need their data. If they're not here, we won't have enough numbers at our school to have a gifted program. There's a systematic and systemic issue that needs to be addressed. It shouldn't be on that child's shoulders. So that's what we're not talking about. We're not talking about keeping a child at a grade level of instruction so that they can have a good test score for that grade and master all of the things instead of putting them at a challenging level of instruction where they may not test as high. I know of a situation where a principal told a group of teachers, you can't give those kids, those gifted kids that you're working with, the next higher material because they have to be exposed to that third grade level material for that test score and they need to test well. I had a director of a district assessment program say, well, your kids have plenty of room. None of them aced and had a perfect score on the state assessment. And so they're fine. They've got lots of room to grow, as if any test is going to be appropriately challenging, not have trick questions, let alone what do we mean by cognitive instruction. So there's a piece that all of us in public ed or any other program where we're struggling with numbers need to pay attention to. What messages are we sending and placement for kids? It's not fragmenting a view of a child as their academic success versus their social emotional needs and success in life. These are not two separate things. We're talking about a child as a holistic being. And so this is not a school psychologist saying, well, I don't really see this kid coming to me needing help with their giftedness. This is an actual comment, but I do see where they need help with their social skills or emotions, as if those are two different things. It's not a school psychologist saying, and again, actual comment, oh my gosh, I've had another referral. These parents all think their kids are gifted when they get an individual request, because you're missing the point that there is some kind of need that is driving that request. And this kid may not be gifted. There may be something else going on, but you don't know. You need to look at that individual situation and not just paint all parents with a brush of assuming that giftedness is better than anything else. It is a piece of information about a kid's needs. It's not that they are more valued than any other person. And that's not what a parent who is coming to you is asking to do. It's not limiting a child from a beneficial learning opportunity because they haven't turned in enough homework or classwork. They're not doing enough in this area. I have stories. We've been collecting stories of these gifted dads who have failed out of high school and have their kids in our program. Some of them went back and got advanced degrees or got halfway through college. One of them, who's here in our school, skipped all his boring classes and went down the hall and sat in on the advanced honors classes. No teacher documented anything, but he's opting into the harder classes, sitting there basically auditing, but they wouldn't let him actually attend it because he wasn't turning in any work in the other class. So missing the point is what we're not talking about. It's not discipline strategies that don't recognize the overexcitabilities that could be going on with these kids. It's not missing the fact that this child's placement has been building and building and building inappropriately, and that kid's about to explode. And we are creating our behavior problems in some situations. And I have seen perfectly calm, quiet, seemingly compliant kids blow it and lose it when they just can't take it anymore. We've got stories of parents with restraint collapse, where their kid is compliant all day, holds it together, and then falls apart when they get in the car because they have held together all day long an inappropriate learning environment, and they have tried to fit in and contain themselves and not be too much, or just do this work that I knew how to do 2 years ago. And some go compliant, internally implode or explode all over the home, and some become discipline situations in schools because we haven't met that. It's not recognizing that for some gifted kids, their social emotional needs are their academic needs. And so we had a student who they were going through a very difficult family situation, and she came in and she wanted to skip 6th grade math and go right into pre-algebra. And she did not feel good that day. Her oxygen levels were low. Some other stuff were going on, and she had some breathing trouble, which is hard at the altitude we're at. And so she didn't test well. And so mom called and said, can you please retest her? She feels better now. And I need you to know that if her math placement is not good, our life is hell at home. She has the stamina to work through the situations that our family is going through if math is okay. It gives her this piece of needs being met that enables her to work through all of these other situations that we have going on. Child-centered gifted education is not presuming that all gifted kids have the same needs and that mildly gifted needs the same thing, 1 grade level ahead, 2 grades level ahead as a profoundly gifted student, and all of that range. It's not saying you have to be gifted across the board in all areas. We've had kids who were advanced in math and a grade level below in reading. We've had a kid identified verbally gifted and had dyslexia. I thought of 2 different stories, as Linda was talking about that piece. So that child-centeredness is that view of those things going on. It is not releasing kids from critically important foundational skills just because they're not interested. We absolutely want to know what they're interested and make sure that they understand that math facts are important. Now, are we going to hold them back from advanced math because, you know, they've got some math fact support they need? No, not necessarily, but it doesn't mean we tell them they never have to learn math facts either, or figure some things out to cope. So it doesn't mean they don't have to learn foundational work, but the question is a ratio. How much time are we investing in them doing interesting work that they're encouraged about, and how much ratio of time are we making them spend on things that are very irrelevant to them or feel like to them a waste of time? How are we managing that proportionality for them? It does not mean, we are not suggesting every program has to be completely individualized. We are not suggesting every program needs to offer this support the same way. It means that we can have a variety of program models and a variety of public, private, charter, magnet, tutoring, homeschooling. We can have a variety that are child-centered at various scales of implementation without needing full individualization, but we are seeing those kids, inviting them to talk with us, inviting those conversations, and then inserting flexibility into that program so that we see them and have those opportunities. And, you know, thinking about the assessment process too, it is not public schools getting an IQ test on every kid. That would be awesome. If we could get the federal government to fund that, somebody else would be fantastic. But it means that if we have a screener that is used to gauge against teachers, and teachers aren't getting this training, so they don't have the opportunity a lot of times to see accurately enough. We do need some screeners to balance and to norm, but you're not going to overweight that screening tool, and you're going to pay attention to that vocabulary. You're going to look for our brown and black kids and how they're talking in their home communities, and that sense of use of language and the quick comebacks and the jokes and the translation with their families, and that linguistic piece and these other flags that show up in communities, and then say, maybe this screener wasn't accurate. Maybe I can get more information in this area. Maybe I can pull in qualitative assessments more. Where do we have a body of evidence to get kids into programs, especially when there's funding involved, where you have a limited amount of time and you're trying to fund a program and you need to know your situations are accurate? We have the advantage at our school of having to be open enrollment. We're required as a charter school to welcome everybody in. And that means we can have some fascinating conversations, but all of us deal with constraints all over. We're trying to match education to what kids' needs are. And if we can invite these conversations about seeing kids and not just a score, not just a developmental level, not just the fact that you're 6, you must need 6-year-old stuff, we can be child-centered across all of these different variety of programs.
That's a great segue, I think, Nikki, thank you, into how we're going to sort of move towards wrapping this up. And that's to talk a little bit about what this kind of theory of child-centered gifted education looks like in practice in our own work. And we've shared some examples along the way, but this is sort of a chance for kind of one last opportunity for our panel to sort of share their own sort of experiences about what's important to them in the programs that they do, or what they're doing in their own programs, or what success looks like in their programs. So Linda, let's start with you. What does child-centered gifted education look like in the work that you do, and what would you like to say about that?
That we do everything collaboratively. We involve the child, we involve the parents. Everyone at our center is on a first name basis. We try to respect everyone involved in decision making. And so we create what I call an optimal development plan for the child, but it's not something we impose. We collaborate with the parents, and the child is brought in. What do you think about this? Is that, if you ruled the school, what would you like? If you ruled the world, what would you like? And so we get the child's input on everything.
Thank you. Anne?
Well, the more gifted children deviate from the norm, the more socially atypical they are. And some of the children at my school have a true or intellectual peer for the first time in their life. And it's really glorious to watch them engaging in in-depth discussions with each other in different areas of mutual interest, without needing to edit their vocabulary or modulate their sense of humor. So that's really satisfying. We stress the importance of having an emotionally kind learning environment where there's psychological safety to be themselves and to make mistakes. There's a lot of choices given, and we capitalize on their strong inner agenda and autonomous drive to learn by offering them a conceptually based curriculum that teaches the skills within an engaging theme. We also ability group for math so that they can keep progressing at their own rate. And lastly, we really try to help them understand themselves in the context of giftedness, their overexcitabilities, the strengths and challenges.
Terrific. Thank you. Ellen?
So I think depending on the environment, so one of the environments that I really focus on is really focusing on that strength-based lens and really understanding the strengths of the child, and also moving beyond the traditional curriculum. And so really focusing on the aspect of integration and the recognition that learning is about the depth of knowledge and not the breadth of knowledge. And so not teaching the same thing for 6 weeks over and over and over because it's a different content. So oftentimes, like a 6th grade social studies is we're going to teach Mesopotamia, then we're going to do ancient Egypt, then we're going to do ancient Greece, then we're going to do, and so it's the same things over and over and over, instead of saying, okay, we're going to focus on ancient Egypt and really do a deep dive. And then now when you can focus on, okay, you know, ancient Greek, well, I now understand ancient Egypt so well that I can do a quick Google search to realize that, oh, well, this same concept or the same topic, this is how I can phrase my question to do a Google search. And so a true child-centered education really looks at the depth and really focusing on the depth so that that application can be applied to the breadth of knowledge and that lifelong learning. And really focusing on, again, that mind, heart, body connection and the whole child, and that it's a package. It's not just a one aspect.
Thank you, for sure. Thank you. Barb?
I'm thinking about a conversation I had with a parent about 2 years ago when our 8th grade kids do an 8th grade project. It's a year-long project, something that they developed, an area that they're really interested in, and that a project they want to do, build something or whatever it is. And at the end of that, they make a presentation, and it can include slideshows and videos and all sorts of things to talk about not only their end product, but their process to get there. And they work with mentors and people in the community. And one dad was coming to it the presentations pretty regularly. And he pulled me aside after one presentation to tell me how we need to be doing more to train kids to make presentations, because the girl who had just presented just stumbled all over all the words, and her slideshow was not professional level, and he just went on and on. And so I said to him, and he has had 5 kids in the school, and 3 of them have been very high achieving academic rock stars and did the professional kind of thing that he aspired for all of his children to do. And I said to him, that was one of the most successful 8th grade project presentations we have had this year. And he was horrified. I said, it took all year for this person to build the confidence to stand in front of all of these people and speak for 15 minutes. If she'd done 15 minutes of hemming and hawing, she should have gotten a standing ovation because she did it. And the fact that she had anything in the slideshow that she would put up there on the screen to make herself so vulnerable. And he was flabbergasted. He said, I never thought about it that way. And I said, that's because you had a different expectation for this child, for everyone. You had the same expectation for everyone. And this was a triumph for this kid. And it was, he never, ever talked to me about that again because that's child-centered. Her presentation didn't meet somebody else's expectation, but it was like getting the gold medal at the Olympics for her to get up and do that. And so that's when I think about child-centered education. It's that, giving kids choices and letting them just come into their own at their own pace.
Thank you so much. Nikki.
I'll let Teresa talk about some of the specific things that she might want to highlight, but I think for us, it's really important that we have important conversations and that we're building teachers' capacity and that we go to other gifted schools. We've visited other ones in the state. We've taken our whole staff to see Linda at the Gifted Development Center, and that we learn from others. And we have built in our building a demonstration classroom so we can have teachers observe each other and also bring in other groups. If you ever want to see that, come give us a call. But we need to not have these conversations in isolation, and we need to have important conversations all across our field about what this can look like and learn from each other, and not have a competitive approach that's missing the point of everybody working together on behalf of kids and meeting the needs of our teachers to see what this can look like, especially as we have so many anomalies of kids in our field as well, and unusual situations that we can learn from each other.
For sure. Thank you so much. Rosemary?
Well, most of my work nowadays is with teachers. And so it's important for me to look at how we can help teachers to get hold of this idea of child-centered education. So we kind of do a lot of work on that. One of the things we talked before about what do we mean by success, and for us, we take that and look at the concept of fulfillment rather than success, because most of our teachers are brought up in a system which measures their work by the measurable success that the kids get. So we try to ask them to look at some different criteria. So much that, I mean, you know, this is one could go on for hours about, but one of the things that we do, since you've asked how do we reflect this in our program, we get the teachers, we build into the work that they're doing the techniques and the strategies that we want them to use with the children. For example, we talk an awful lot about choice, so we build that into what the teachers do. And we use a lot of their work. If a teacher comes up with a really good piece of work, then we ask for that teacher's permission and we build it into the course itself, sometimes into the modules, but otherwise into the archive that they all have access to. So when we come back to that module next time, the teachers will be able to say, look, here is a teacher just like you. Go and have a look at what this teacher did with maths or what this teacher did with whatever it might happen to be. And we do link a lot of that to thinking about the emotional and social and ethical development of the children they are working with. And I'm thinking of an example where, for instance, a teacher, one of our lovely one-day school teachers had a group of kids who were about 10. And she came into class and she said to them, she just sat there and she said to them, right, okay, what do we mean by civilization? And she sat back and let them discuss it. And being gifted kids, they talked for a long time and had all sorts of ideas. But mostly what they came up with was that to be a civilized person, you had to have all of the things, all of the modern gadgets and the techniques in the 20th century or 21st century now, but 20th century when she did that. All of those kinds of things, beautiful roads, drainage, electrical equipment, and so on and so forth and so forth. And she just sat there and she listened. And when they finished talking and came up with what they thought was a definition, about 3/4 of an hour later, she got a picture and she put it in front of them. And the picture was of a woman in India, obviously poor, getting water for her family from the stream running through the center of the village. And she just sat back and she said, "Is this woman civilized?" And left it with them to discuss. And that's one of the examples that we pick up and use with teachers. Lots and lots and lots of examples like that, so they can pull it apart and see where they're going to go with it. We also have an approach that we use where we ask teachers to actually ask themselves what they think about what they're going to teach. So we start by saying, why have you chosen this particular topic you are going to teach? And we come up with reasons, or we haven't done it for a while, or it's in the news, or we've got good resources there. And I say, yeah, but what's missing? And what is missing? The child. Okay, so if we take it back to the child, and we go from there to get the teachers to move in and to try and see how their own thinking has been narrowed down and shaped to meet a goal that's got nothing to do with the children that they are actually teaching. And so we teach them conceptual planning as well as topic planning, a whole lot of stuff like this. And there is such fun to work like that with teachers and to see them to light up and to find their own imagination and their own creativity. And then they are so much better placed to work with the children in their classes. So I'll leave it there, but it fascinates me, that whole process.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Teresa. You muted.
I started off really well. So I get a quote in my email every day, and today's actually is pretty spot on what we're talking about. Howard Thurman said, "Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I think that our program tries to help kids find who they are as people, as gifted people, and yeah, the academics are a piece of that, but it's more than that. It's how do I help a child be comfortable with themselves and be able to self-advocate and ask the hard questions and go about doing all of that work while they're creating a moat around their castle, or discovering why they had a moat around a castle and why I would like a moat around my office, tiny little things, right? But I think that that's probably the most important work that we do, is helping kids figure out what makes them come alive.
That's so true. Thank you so much. When I think of my own school, I think of two things when I think of what we're trying to accomplish with kids. One is when families ask me, what happens to your kids after they leave your school? And my answer is, well, some go to a school for the arts, and some go to a really competitive, academically rigorous Jesuit school, and some do running start and get off to college early. And my graduates, when I look at my kids who've gone on beyond school, I've got everything from Harvard grads to carpenters to ballerinas to indie rock stars to everything in between. And that to me is a sign of success. The other thing I think of is a student we had graduate from 8th grade 2 years ago who is severely dyslexic and came to us in 4th grade feeling like she was just incredibly inept at everything, and particularly at reading and writing. We used a lot of accommodations with her to allow her to really express herself. She came to us actually with verbiage that I thought was really helpful. She would talk about her eye reading level versus her ear reading level, because she could read things through an audiobook at a much higher level than reading with her eyes. And it took a lot of work and a lot of time to help build her confidence. But by the time she was an 8th grader, she loved to write and began to see herself as an author, and actually entered a contest and won an award as one of the top aspiring 8th grade writers in the country by the National Council of Teachers of English. And we felt like helping her really find her voice and discover her strength was really what it's all about. So
You're muted, Sandy.
sorry, we could go on all day, but we won't. We want to end with just a little reflection on what difference we hope to make. Barb, I'm gonna turn it over to you to think and talk a little bit about what we're hoping to accomplish as a consortium, as a group here.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. I think in summary, what we have described here is that often in typical educational settings, the students are forced into a system, into a process, into procedures that all are in service to that system. What we know about child-centered education is that it is sometimes inconvenient, and it's our job that in child-centered education, the teaching, the learning, the resources, the process, the procedure are all there in service to the student and to the learner and the child. And that's what differentiates a child-centered program from a traditional, typical, otherwise kind of a program. So thank you all for coming. Sandy, I think you are going to have a few words for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barb. We are so grateful to you for spending this time with us. And we wanted to share just a couple of things with you if you want to continue to think about this topic. The document that we've published, What is Child-Centered Gifted Education, can be found on the Gifted Development Center's website under resources. And there'll be a link in the YouTube description for this video. Our email contact information is here, childcenteredgifted@gmail.com. If you're interested in joining this group, we're looking for more people who have the same kind of heart for child-centered gifted education. We'd love to have you join us. So reach out and we'll be happy to include you. And the Gifted Development Center, Dr. Silverman's organization, this link is here as well. So we encourage you to read our document and read more about what we've had to say about child-centered gifted. We thank you for spending time with us today, and we'll see you soon, we hope.